if you have the right culture and the right of people to facilitate what you need to do, making sure that it stays that way has like a self-reinforcing principle. More people can interview. The interviews that people do just have a higher probability of leading to an aligned opinion or a very similar opinion. And I think especially early on, your first 30 or 40 or 50 employees, how good you are at saying no and also letting people go, unfortunately, if you make a mistake. The purity of the culture and of the team at that stage, I think, can really set the path for going forward for how you develop. So I don't know where that got punched into my head, some of those stories that I've heard, maybe other articles that I've read, but we've really followed that principle for that reason. It's just you can feel it. You can feel it if there's a really effective person, but that just doesn't fit, or somebody that really does fit but isn't effective. You really do need both, and it just takes a lot to find that.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we're going to look at retaining talent, and you can't talk about retaining talent without you talking about attracting talent. So inside this episode, we're going to unpack retaining talent and also attracting it. Our special guest is the CEO founder of Fulcrum Pro. They're a manufacturing ERP, if you will, creating software for the manufacturing industry. Very young company, but they are growing and scaling fast. They're in hyper growth mode. They're raising money, and they are really understanding how to build the team that makes it possible for them to grow fast. Well, that's the reason why Sonny and I talk about retaining talent. And we start the conversation with how do you attract the right talent? And some of the things he shares in there about the hiring process and about why hire slow is so important for them, and how he uses culture fit to create a space where culture is able to reinforce itself. That really is a surprising element when you have the right culture, is that people protect it. They don't want the wrong people in there. The bad apples can spoil the whole bunch, as they say. But we spend a lot of the conversation talking about retaining talent and his leadership principles. I think you'll find a lot of insight and distinction inside of this that might be surprising for you. Now, my job is to help you and your team take it to the next level. There's two ways at which I serve clients. One is through executive coaching. I've been doing this for 10 years, where I provide an outside perspective on your performance and your ability to scale your company and lead it to that next level. Every client I'm working with, whether they be smaller $2 or $3 million companies to some of the $100 million companies, they all need some insight around the different inflection points of growth. Now, you may be feeling this yourself, and I'd love to talk to you about what's going on in your business and get to know you. The second way we serve people is through leadership development. We find that there's lots of people out there that are becoming managers that are expected to, take their team to that next level, but they don't have the foundational skills that it takes to become leaders. And we give them those skills through a very specific program. It's proven, it's tried and tested, and we've actually made some improvements on that to better serve you and your managers as they transform into leaders. And that's really our value proposition for the leadership development side of our business. When you think about all the things it takes to get to the next level, the conflict and the chaos and the challenges that you have to overcome, wouldn't it be great to have someone in your corner who's been through it with others and has seen these different things and can guide you through some of these difficult times? It's going to happen if you're scaling fast. Just reach out to me, Gene Hammett. Go to schedule your call. I'd love to talk to you about what's going on in your business, get to know you. When you think of leadership and you think of growth, think of us. And now here's the interview with Sonny. Sonny, how are you?
Great. Nice to meet you, Gene.
It's great to have you here on the podcast. We're going to talk about leadership and culture, specifically attracting and retaining talent. Sonny, you've got an incredible business that we've been doing some research on. Tell us about Fulcrum Pro.
We launched our product just 3 years ago. And at that time, the team was a handful of people in size, I think, to under 10. And in the beginning, it was bootstrapped. We sold to customers directly for the first year of our existence and raised some venture capital. And really, that's where the capital to grow the company came from. We grew from 10 to 30 and then 30 to 80 recently and are still growing. So a lot of what you talk about in terms of the chaos that comes with scaling a team, with having people develop as fast as the company's developing, those are all things that we're experiencing now and have experienced over the last 3 years as we've grown.
Well, we were going to talk about attracting and retaining talent. And I would imagine that you're probably still hiring because you're trying to grow fast. Is that accurate?
Yep, absolutely.
And are you having a tough time locating the right talent for the positions you have open?
Yes and no. I mean, one thing we discovered is if you want really good talent, you just have to do the brute force work of talking to a lot of people. All the tricks that we've ever tried to try to make it more efficient just made the candidate selection pool worse. And so, famously, we talk to roughly 80 people before we make one offer, and our offers have roughly an 80% acceptance rate. So I think it's really good for the brain to talk to a lot of people so you can get a good sense of what the pool is and what you're looking for. And I think it's also really, really good to be explicit about who you are, the shortcomings of the job and of the company. And that actually generates a lot more credibility and also increases the probability that people fit. So those are probably the two biggest things that has allowed us to not, I guess, quote unquote, have a hard time hiring, even though we still talk to a lot of people.
Let's dive into the principles of this. And I don't know, have you had other businesses before that you had to do a similar kind of scaling experience?
One from the outside, where I was, a friend's business that I helped out with, not in any sort of operational, meaningful way, but kind of saw some of it and listened to his stories about how difficult it was and how it felt. And unfortunately for that particular business, a bit of a collapse before rebirthing into something really good, but getting to 80, 90, 100 people and then having to lay off half of them and then before regrowing again. So I've heard a lot of stories like that and a lot of very deep personal stories from other CEOs. I ran a World of Warcraft guild in college and grew that team to about 60 people in size. And I know it sounds like a really weird allegory, but there's a lot of very common aspects to it in terms of the different roles that emerge when organizations get larger. I don't know how much stock you put in the Dunbar numbers of how many people you can know and what relationships you can keep, but it really does feel like that 30 to 50 point is an inflection point. The 15 to 20 person point is an inflection point. It's a little different for businesses than personal relationships, but those are the experiences that kind of molded my philosophies here.
Sonny, let's dive into the core principles. It sounds like one of the core principles you have is to hire slow. If you're talking to 80 people to make one offer, it takes time. Why is that so important to the success of getting the right person?
I think there's a reinforcing effect. I'm sure you've seen it too. And I've listened to some of the podcasts that you've had with other people. And there is some commonality where if you have the right culture and the right people to facilitate what you need to do, making sure that it stays that way has like a self-reinforcing principle. More people can interview. The interviews that people do just have a higher probability of leading to an aligned opinion or a very similar opinion. And I think especially early on, your first 30 or 40 or 50 employees, how good you are at saying no and also letting people go, unfortunately, if you make a mistake, the purity of the culture and of the team at that stage, I think can really set the path for going forward for how you develop. So I don't know where that got punched into my head, some of those stories that I've heard, maybe other articles that I've read, but we've really, really followed that principle for that reason is just you can feel it. You can feel it if there's a really effective person, but that just doesn't fit, or somebody that really does fit, but isn't effective. You really do need both. And it just takes a lot to find that.
I'm kind of curious, what are the tools or the things that you look at to see if there's a culture fit for a candidate?
How they engage. So one of the things that we do here that's a little different is that it's fairly common in tech companies to do like a puzzle interview just to see how you think. It's common in finance as well and in consulting and in other industries like that. But at Fulcrum, when you do the puzzle interview, you do it with a team member of ours, and our team member doesn't know the answer to the question either. And the goal is to solve the problems, obviously, but really it's to see how you work with somebody else. And it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, really the values that we're trying to suss out are, do you care about what other people think? Do you have any humility about your own thoughts? And do you have a transparency of thought? If you're trying to pretend or masquerade like you know the answer or you're very confident you're going to get there, you're unlikely to really fit in here. For us, one of our biggest existential challenges is that we're trying to build something for an industry, and we're not a manufacturing company. Most software companies struggle with this. Some of them struggle less. But if you can think about it, some of our salespeople talk to customers more than our engineers. And if we can't create this extremely transparent environment, the cybernetic brain internally, organically, we're just not going to share enough information for the overall product and the company to be really, really, really good. So those values are tactically and practically valuable, But that's really how we ferret out whether somebody fits or not, is we put them in situations can be assessed in just an hour and a half to try to get them to relax, loosen up, be themselves, and see how they interact with our people.
Now, Sonny's been talking about this puzzle interview, and you've probably heard these things before, the difficult questions that might be a little esoteric. But here's the big concept behind this that I want you to think about. Because I was talking with an executive client the other day in my coaching, and he was like, I wish I could test salespeople like I would test in other roles. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I wish I could determine if they're good at sales, because salespeople are really good at interviewing typically, and they may not know what they're doing. And I said, well, let's talk about designing a simple test, a puzzle, if you will, just for the skills for that role. And we talked about the skills inside the sales role. We talked about, ways he could come up with tests. And it was very clear that he was missing an opportunity. It was sort of a blind spot inside of his own hiring process. Now, he is early in the going of this, but I share it with you because I want to make sure that you are aware that you don't have to just accept the traditional flow of interviews for anyone you hire. You can have a test, whether it be a puzzle test, whether it be, a spreadsheet test for certain people, whether it be a coding test or something like that, or it can be sales skills or any other skills that are necessary. You can create those things and make that a part of the process to make sure you're hiring the right person. Now back to Sonny. We've been talking about attracting talent, and that's such an important piece to scaling your business, is having the right people that want to work with you. What else do you think goes into attracting talent before we look at the retention of that talent?
You want to attract the right people, not just attract anybody. If you want to attract everybody, I think you have an ingestion problem. You have to digest all of those applications, all those resumes. It actually makes it worse. Like, the ideal way to attract customers is very similar to the ideal way to attract candidates. You want the customers you can actually serve really well. You don't just want every customer. And you want the candidates that have a high probability of fitting in. And so the hardest thing for me that I learned is just being extremely explicit about everything. Instead of using generic terminology about who we are, we say this is an extremely challenging environment. We're growing really fast. There are no roles that are very defined. The expectation is that you do whatever is the most important for the company, not what fits into a job description, and that you're willing to be flexible and willing to be blunt. These things scare off a great majority of the people that could potentially work here. But it has an effect of attracting the people that should work here even harder. And that signal to noise ratio kind of compression or extraction is, I think, more important than just attracting everybody. So the stronger you can be specific and honest about who your company is and why, the good and the bad, I find that it actually attracts people stronger that should work here. So
I love the thinking, and I appreciate you going to the detail of that, because I agree with you. I'm on an interesting side of this equation of helping people, and teams perform at a higher level, and you got to have the right people. And most people are not willing to scare them off, as you described, through maybe puzzles that challenge them, or through being very explicit. So I appreciate the detail that you provided for us, Sonny. Let's switch gears, because I would really love to know, once you've got the right talent on board, what are the main levers that you pull to make sure you retain the right talent?
So I think a couple things, the counterintuitive, the secret things, I guess, if you want, the things that we discovered that we didn't read anywhere else. One, I have this metric of like stress versus safety. As you increase stress, you need to increase safety. As you decrease safety, you need to decrease stress. But I think what I did before, when I was less mature, is when things got stressful, I would hide it from people that worked with me or worked for me. I would try to take on more myself, and I wouldn't share it with them. That doesn't create trust, and it doesn't create the maximum velocity. You can't do anything on your own. Like, the key strength of humans is that we work really well in teams and groups. And if you're not sharing that stress, you're not actually creating any sort of team dynamics. People don't actually work well together in that environment. But what I was afraid of was also true. If you put too much stress on people, don't give them a way to solve that stress, or give them a way to understand that stress, or give the context there, they will burn out. And that burnout has less to do with the amount of work they're doing, and far more to do with the amount of unresolvable stress. So you have to increase safety somehow. And that safety is adding context, explaining why, giving more information about the financial health of the company, fundraising targets, growth, when someone is let go or quits, we have a whole lessons learned about how we made a mistake, why they were good, why we were good, why we were bad, why they were bad. And even though those are really, really difficult things to do, and it might not sound like it increases safety, that level of transparency and honesty and vulnerability is the best way to increase safety. You give a person a feeling that, oh, people who are let go, they get dozens and dozens of conversations, more resources to pour on them, more help, not just kind of left in the dark. Oh, we know why this person left, instead of just kind of sweeping it under the rug. So even though it seems more difficult and it feels like it might scare people, explaining what happened, even if you messed up as a company or as a leader, it massively increases the safety and thus massively allows you to have people understand the stresses that come with growing really fast. And so that I think is an anchoring principle, is making sure that we have some component of both. We can't shield the stress from our employees, but we also have to do extra work to increase their psychological safety during that stress.
Now, Sonny just mentioned transparency, and I never want to miss this opportunity because a lot of people misunderstand what transparency is. There's different kinds of transparency, but here's the basic understanding. We all have a transparency line. That transparency line is literally where you believe you should share this or shouldn't share it. And wherever that is, it could be in your personal life, it can be in your professional life, or in the business, if you will. That's your transparency line. One is good and one is bad. And so you stay away from sharing the things that you don't want to share, the things that you feel like are not appropriate. Makes sense. But I urge you to make your transparency line as far to the left, if you will. I'm not sure if it's a left or a right thing. Actually, it's not. But my point is, you want to make a level of transparency that really does create a sense of safety. If you have secrets and you don't share it with people, they make up what's going on inside the business. But if you're transparent with them and you tell them, hey, we're doing well over here, but we're still struggling in these areas, you'll be surprised about what those people are willing to do. They will take more ownership in it because you've trusted in them. They feel like they're part of something special. They're in the inner circle, if you will. Now, if you have thousands of employees, you may not be able to do this, but I urge you to look at your transparency line and be as transparent as possible. One of the main factors to get people to feel like owners is those that have a transparency. And this may mean financial transparency, but it also means the conversations and feedback of transparency. All these factor together to come up with how you see transparency and how you leverage it inside your culture, your leadership. That's my take on this. I just wanted to share with you an insight and distinction around transparency to help you be an exceptional leader. Back to Sonny. I was just talking to a client the other day, and he had heard from a mentor of his how important or how unimportant it is to tell why the company was going in a certain direction. And I was like, I needed more context, but it was really interesting because it's very opposite of what you're describing in giving them safety, giving them context, showing your full transparency where needed. I really appreciate you going to the detail there to talk about safety, because I think not enough leaders understand the value of that. They just want to get the work done. But it sounds like you have a real good finger on the pulse of the people around that, and that allows you to get more work done. Probably. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, working through other people is the most important change that I've made myself, and I encourage people who are on my leadership team to do. I think I didn't think about this in this way before, but I do have a unique position to gather context. I talk to 70-some people every single day, or every single week. I talk to almost everybody in the company every single week, every single month. And I get to pick the highest peaks in all of their biggest failures and biggest successes and all the notable things that come out. What I lose is the detail of the work, the individual interactions with customers, with the code, with the design, with with marketing copy or whatever it may be. But I get to gather all the highs and lows everywhere else. And I can then share that and rebroadcast it in the right way, and can influence the company in that way. I think that force multiplying effect is just really hard for me to grasp, or was hard for me to grasp in school and in video games, in personal life. You can only really measure what you do individually, maybe on a sports team, but sports teams aren't 100 people in size or 50 people in size, or at least sports I played, they're 10, 20 people in size. So I think it's just a really hard psychological thing to grasp. But yeah, I think talking to everybody, having contact with everybody, as much time as it takes to have a one-on-one with everybody every quarter, with most people every month, with my direct reports every week, I religiously block off Thursdays and parts of Wednesdays just to make sure that I'm making time for that on my calendar. And as we continue to grow, I'm not going to be able to sustain that, but keeping that spirit alive, I think, is really important.
I want to wrap our conversation up today with just looking at the bigger leadership principles. We've been talking about attracting talent, retaining talent, but the leadership principles really do guide us as we move forward. Have you codified that for yourself? And can you explain how you see the world of leadership for you?
Yeah, I wrote this document that I got the idea from a book called from Eli Gill called I think it's called High Growth Startups or something like that. But it's a document that's called How to Work with Me, and it defines like how you define your success, how to communicate with me, that I like Slack messages over emails, and then how to build trust with me and things like that. So inside that document, I think there are some pretty solid pillars of principles. The first is pursuing truth and making sure that you know what it is instead of pursuing relationships. I know that sounds weird as we're talking about retaining talent, but when you pursue truth, you make those relationships more pure. And so listening to more people before talking myself, understanding the details of the work and being able to go jump in and do that work, that I think is one incredibly important anchoring principle. I believe that people don't want to work for people that can't teach them something. And if you can't teach your team something, it's unlikely you're going to retain the best people. And the only way you can teach them something is if you talk to them and listen to them and understand them and know what gaps you need to fill in and how to work with them. I think number two is that explaining of my thoughts. Sometimes my thoughts are wrong, sometimes they're right, but thoroughly thinking about things and explaining them and communicating them is the job of a leader. It's the communications job. It's how do you talk to investors and customers, but really how do you talk to your team in a way that communicates things as purely as possible. I think the third principle from a leadership perspective is just making sure that you understand that directionality and alignment are only achievable by making a decision, even if that decision's wrong. This may be a weird reference, but there's an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Captain Picard and the chief medical officer, Beverly Crusher, are stuck on a planet. And on that planet, you can hear each other's thoughts. And they don't know where to go. And Captain Picard just says, "We're going this direction." And Dr. Crusher's like, "Wait a second, you don't know if this is the right direction to go or not. You just made a decision." And he's like, "Yes, actually, that is what leadership is, that some direction will tell you information, and staying still is probably the worst thing that we can do." And I know that little snippet that I heard when I was in middle school or high school or something has stuck with me for a long period of time. I've discovered that to be true as well. People are looking to their leaders for direction to take on those risks and to be willing to be wrong. No one is expecting their leaders to be right all the time. But inaction, I think, is a failure of leadership. I think the last is just having the courage to do the right thing. I think we all know more often than not what the right thing is. And no one expects us to be right about the right thing, but they expect us to at least try to do the right thing. So those, I think, are the four pillars of how I think about what leadership is and what I try to teach the team that works with me.
Sonny, thanks for sharing all of these insights and strategies that you have used to grow your company. This is exactly what we do here to be able to tell the story of founders and how they have created the kind of companies that really do scale fast. So I appreciate your wisdom.
Yeah, appreciate great questions, and thank you.